Hey folks, today we're covering Johan's replies to the 11th Tinto Talks around EU5, and this was all about the military. If you're not sure exactly what this covered, it was the previous video that is on the channel, but we're just going to get straight into the answers. And I'm going to start with a bit of a longer one, because Johan did give some extra clarification as to how the manpower system works, really step by step explaining how it works. So we're going to cover this first, because it will give us a good grounding for any future talking about manpower. So as Johan says here, you have a manpower pool. A horse archer regiment reduces that pool by 1 manpower each month, and that was in the screenshot that was in the last dev diary. A Kurultai, if fully supplied, will add 50 manpower per month and will allow a pool of 3,000 manpower. This is basically 5 times the amount it makes each year, so you can have like a stockpile of manpower that builds up over time. Building a single horse archer regiment of 100 men will cost 100 manpower, which makes sense. So say you build 25 horse archer regiments, that will cost you 2,500 manpower and will have a monthly upkeep of 25 manpower, which, as Johan said at the start, that's just the like natural attrition, people getting old, retiring, just making sure the regiment is fully staffed at all times. Now in the next bit, there's actually a mistake, which Johan corrects later. I'm not 100% sure why he didn't just go back and edit this post, but that's where we're at. This means that you will only regain 25 manpower each month, he meant to say here, because that's the 50 that the building creates, minus the 25 for the 25 regiments, leaving you with 25 manpower spare. And this will make restoring the manpower pool much slower, which means it will take 50 years to maximize your manpower pool with your regular army raised. So, you know, that is just the maths there. You have this 50 manpower per month coming in for the building, but then if you actually build the units, half of that is being taken in this example just to keep those fully upkept. So you only have 25 a month going into the pool that you are allowed to build. So say you build the units, well, that's depleted that manpower pool by 2,500. You've only got 500 manpower left. Well, if you're only building it up then by 25 a month, you've got to think that's going to take many years, as he says here, up to 50 years to rebuild it all the way back up to 3,000. So then if you take a lot of attrition, a lot of losses in battle, you can then replenish that unit relatively quickly. But if you build that unit and then immediately go into a war, you're not going to have the manpower built up to replenish it at all. It's going to be very risky taking them into battle. So it is going to change, I think, some of the strategy around fighting. Whereas in EU4, yes, you have that manpower pool, but you just build that up. You have so much in there most of the time that if you even wipe your entire army, you generally could just bring it back and just go for a second round of that total war. So it's going to be cool to see how this interacts in the game. But as Johan does continue to say you fight a battle with your 2,500 horse archers and you lose 30% of them, you will now need to regain 750 manpower from the pool while also still maintaining that 25 manpower a month upkeep as well. So again, just really explaining in detail how this is going to work. And then also disregarding the fact that losing population is bad for you, because obviously these people get drawn from the general population as well, so it's affecting your realm. Losing manpower is not quickly regained, so really just reinforcing that fact that you're not always just going to want to be doing these crazy wars all over the place, because you can kind of just rebuild relatively quickly in EU4. This is going to have long-term effects on your realm, and if you get weakened, I'm sure the AI is going to be smart and think, okay, that realm's lost a lot of troops, I can see maybe their manpower isn't that good, I'm going to quickly attack them and take advantage of that. Irishman then asks, will your troops reinforce while in enemy provinces? Can I bribe mercenaries in another army to swap sides or disband? And does how well a campaign go affect the morale of your troops? Some of these not answered, but it was all just one big question. No, your regulars need to be in friendly territory to reinforce. I think that makes sense. And mercenaries, though, can be bribed. If that is a direct answer to the question, you could be finding another army and you can go to the mercenaries that are fighting in that other army and just say, here's some money, come join my side instead. I'm sure it's going to be very expensive to do. I can't imagine, say mercenaries cost 100 gold, just as an example. I can't imagine it's going to be 100 gold just to bribe them onto your side if they're already fighting for the other team. I've got to think it's going to be some multiplication of that. So maybe it costs you 200 gold to make them convert over to your team, because otherwise I could see that getting very kind of like gamey, where you could go up against another realm that has a lot of mercenaries, wait for them to almost attack you, and then just bribe their mercenaries to join your side. If it costs the same, why wouldn't you ever just do that and just let them have them first, let them get overconfident, and then take advantage of that? So I've got to think there's going to be some negative to doing it, either cost or, I don't know, maybe some kind of opinion modifier or something with the rest of the nation. It's got to be something, otherwise I think you'd always just do it that way around. but we'll see obviously in a later dev diary. The next question, will regiments gain experience from fighting war as well as being able to be drilled as they talked about in the dev diary? And the answer being yes, you get experience for fighting wars. Hopefully a much bigger amount of experience than actually just drilling and practicing for a war. I would hope so anyway. The next question, with the unit types, for example, the steppe horse archers, again, that were covered in the dev diary, will it be possible to have 2 or more different types of cavalry, like lancers and archers, unlike in EU4 where you can only have one type of cavalry? And the answer is yes, you can actually mix and match these units, have some horse archers, have some lancers, have other kinds of horse cavalry as well. So, and maybe even potentially other ones, I suppose. Maybe some camel cavalry, maybe some elephant cavalry, kind of mix it all in there. It's going to be interesting to see what advantages you get for doing that, or whether it is actually better to focus on one kind of cavalry. So anyway, an interesting question, one I hadn't thought of, but actually a really cool answer there as well from Johan. And the next question, regarding military units, are there any special units to the game, perhaps some unique to some nations? And Johan saying, yes, the horse archer was actually a good example of that. He does also cover later on that I think longbowmen, the English, have a special version of that, obviously pretty famous for their longbowmen, and they are going to get a special unit around that as well. I would think many places will get this. The next question, is raising levies instant, or does it depend how much control you have over a province? The levies we see in Sweden in the dev diary, would they be ready quickly in Stockholm, but might take longer for the ones in eastern Finland, kind of like the outside of your realm? Will they raise up as fast than in your core area of your realm? And also, how does reinforcement work? Will that be covered soon? If a French army is marching through German land, will it be instant reinforcement or at a reduced rate? Or will the reinforcements need to get to the main army? Quite a few different questions there. Johan's saying, though, levies take time to spawn. If it's all in one region, it's even slower than local. So it looks like you can raise your army from all your provinces, and it sounds like they will take time to spawn. But if you want to raise your entire army in one location, in one spawn point, it's going to be very slow. I guess it probably takes the furthest regiment as the kind of like locked in spawn speed. So depending on how far away your furthest regiment is, that probably slows down raising your entire army in one place, which makes sense. You know, they're traveling there first before they can get raised, whereas if you raise them in the province they're from, it's going to be quicker anyway. And then to cover the French army example, the French army will not reinforce the German lands. As he already said, you can only reinforce in friendly land. He does cover on later on that if you've conquered land, if you have it sieged down and under your control in a war, you can replenish in that, but it's much slower than if you were in your own native lands, which again, kind of makes sense. The next question, all around XP for your regiments. Presumably it decays with losses and slowly over periods of peace with no drilling. The obvious answer, yes, if they're not doing something that would help them either keep their experience at a certain level or get better, that it will just slowly deplete. And I think this does kind of working quite well with the fact that, you know, keeping your armies replenished, keeping that kind of manpower ticking over, as we saw with the horse archers needing 1 a month just to kind of like naturally attrition people out. It does make sense that your XP would fall over time if you weren't doing anything, because obviously people are retiring. People are just getting too old to be in the army. They're replaced by new recruits and they don't have that experience. So again, kind of feeding in these different systems, and it makes other systems kind of make sense as well with how they work. Rico then asked, is there any negative to having a large standing army, lots of manpower buildings in terms of produced goods in the location? So pretty much, can you just build a lot of manpower buildings? Will that affect your actual production in your realm as well? And Johan's reply is yes, people are not an endless resource. So you can build all these buildings, but you just won't have people to staff them and keep them operating. So it wouldn't make sense. You're probably going to have to choose, okay, this province has a lot of farmland, a lot of mining or something. So I'm going to focus on that there, and maybe somewhere else not quite as good for production, I'll build my military buildings there. Try build it up with a lot of population, but that's going to be where I kind of bring my manpower from, and these other areas are going to be for other things. It's not going to be worth just trying to do everything everywhere. It just won't make sense if you try and do that. The next question, all around auxiliary units, what are they? Are they some kind of low tier infantry or a supply unit, kind of like donkeys in Imperator Rome? Yes. If you weren't aware, there were donkeys as a unit in that game, and it was all about helping your supply limit and things like that. It's a support unit. Donkeys in Imperator Rome were auxiliary units. So that is what the auxiliary units are going to be. It's all going to be, I imagine, around helping you replenish your army. I don't know. We'll get a lot more information in the future, but it is more about kind of supporting your troops rather than actually fighting in the battles themselves. You know, do you want to go up against a horde of donkeys? Probably would be pretty bad, especially back in those times. I mean, to be honest, even in the Middle Ages, going into the Renaissance, probably don't want to fight like 200 donkeys, do you? It'd be pretty painful. But anyway, on to the next one. When a war ends and the levies are disbanded, would levy soldiers go back to where they came from, or would they just be randomly allocated to somewhere in your nation? And the answer, and this is actually pretty cool, I didn't think of this one either, they go back exactly where they came from, i.e. those who are still alive. I mean, it would be pretty funny if the dead people got transported there, but no. It's only the alive people that get to go back home, sadly. But yeah, they actually go back, so it must all be tracked. So this regiment came from this place. Whoever's alive at the end of the war, they go back to that exact place. I don't know, I kind of thought it would just get shared out like a percentage. So if you had like 70% of your army left, it would just divide that between all your provinces that raised troops, and they would all get 70% of their stuff back. But no, certain ones from certain areas. So again, this is going to give some cool kind of strategic thinking to wars. Maybe you'd have an important unit where you're like, okay, I don't mind bringing this into this battle, but I know where it's from. It's really important for other production maybe. So I'm going to hold them back maybe. I don't want them to go into battle, lose lots of men, but maybe the war's going badly and you're like, okay, I'm just going to have to throw everyone into this and just see what comes out the other side. So again, how the system's going to work, I think is going to be really interesting about kind of like this strategy of going to war, and much less that EU4 of like, I'm just going to go to war. Yep, I've got my army. Let's go. Everyone's dead. Doesn't matter. I'll just raise everyone up again. Whereas now in EU5, it's all these different layers of how it can affect your realm and how you're going to be able to like recover in the future, depending on how these wars go. The next question, a super interesting one. If I wanted to do a game as Hesse, I apologize, I've probably butchered how you pronounce that name, where I become the mercenary capital of Europe and constantly renting out my highly trained army to the highest bidder, are there systems in place for me to be able to do this? And the answer is, yes, you can do this, which is awesome. You can just play Tall as a small place in Europe or anywhere in the map, to be honest. This is just a historical example of this. And you can, I guess, make your army up, constantly have them at that high XP level. And then when there's wars going on, you can then rent them out to the different realms. Obviously, you'll lose people in those battles and things like that, but you can basically run your economy on having this highly trained force that you rent out as mercenaries. And I just think that's going to be such a cool way to play the game. You can have so many different ways, I think, in EU5. You can have, like, colonialism. You can be able to play Tall, maybe with a lot of trade and things like that. You can just do your traditional map painting campaigns. I'm just going to take over whatever I want. But then there's also ones like this, where you can just have a small nation, really highly regarded troops, and then kind of rent them out to the highest bidder, make money, and then that's going to be your campaign. Again, these different ways you can play it sound really, really interesting. The next question, one I covered actually earlier on, will there be longbowmen for the English? And the answer is yes, there will be a unique longbow unit for the English realm, which again makes sense with the earlier answer about different units and things like that. Chubby Dodo, I just had to say the name because it's funny. Are there any drawbacks to losing half your male population in war, population growth, etc.? And the answer being, besides the economy tanking, ? I think the question was more around like, will it affect like reproduction rates and things like that in your realm? But I think Johan's reply more just saying like your population in general, having them kind of like die off and go means your economy will be tanked and you'll be just affecting your realm in general. Didn't really answer, I think, the population growth side of it. I'm not sure how much that would affect it because that's probably just a numbers game. And if you lose people, obviously your realm will grow slower in population. In the next question, Rule Britannia back with another question. How strong are regular mercenary regiments compared to levies? Would it be feasible for a rich country to maintain a small regular force and then just hire mercenaries to fight your wars and spare your population early on? Or will the numbers available through levies be so large that this strategy is not viable? Johan's reply, yes, but it depends on which enemy you fight. So a bit of a cryptic answer to this. I actually like the question here. You could have a small levy army so that the maximum amount of people don't go to war in your realm. That keeps your realm powerful whilst you're at war. It's not affecting your production and things like that, your food gathering. And you could just fill out your army with mercenaries. Is that a good strategy versus just having all your levies and then maybe supplementing it with some mercenaries or something? And it sounds like from Johan, either way is viable. It just depends who you're fighting. I guess if you're fighting somebody who's the same or weaker than you can probably just have a smaller army and then have some mercenaries. Whereas if you're fighting a large army, if somebody powerful is coming after you, you're going to have to just raise everyone and do the best you can. I think that's kind of what he's getting at. It really just depends who you're fighting. The next question, levies, we should be able to raise them before the war. As they said in the dev diary, you can only raise your army when you're actually at war. So you declare war and then you can raise your army. At the end of the day, it's the country's choice if they want to take an economy hit by having their levies drawn up in peacetime And the answer from Johan, really explaining that this is more of a technical limitation in a way. You could do that, and they previously did have it work in that way, where you could just have your levies raised whenever you wanted, but that pretty much it made the AI really exploitable and really easy to beat. I would imagine similar to Crusader Kings, I'm sure they've covered it there as to why they don't allow this either, and that is that people would just raise their army, have it right on the border of their realm, and then when they declared war, they could just immediately hop over the border and immediately start winning that war against the other realm. That's why you can't do it in Crusader Kings. That's why Crusades and Crusader Kings are kind of interesting, because you can always just raise your levies, but you can't declare war with your levies raised. So it's pretty pointless to do it, apart from fighting off raiders and things like that. It's useful for that, but you can't declare war with your levies raised. Crusades, however, they work differently. You can have your levy raised, and then the crusade gets declared because it's not been declared by you. So a cool strategy is to just raise all your troops, park them right next to where the crusade's going to happen, and then as soon as the crusade starts, you just immediately start sieging places down, get a lot of points in that system, and then generally you're always the top person. And as I said, I think that's just the same thing here, where it's so exploitable by a human player that it just doesn't make sense, unfortunately, for it to work that way. Again, it might work that way where you can have them raised, but you can't declare wars whilst they are raised, or whether it's literally you can't even press the button whilst you're at peacetime. I'd be surprised if it's that way, but you never know. It does sound like, though, it might work a little bit like Crusader Kings. The next question, will levies experience be reduced to 0 after you disband them, or will it decay over time? Can you drill levies? Yes, it will be reduced to 0, and no, you can't drill levies. It is just your populace getting conscripted into an army. You can get rid of them, but it does reduce their experience to 0, which again makes sense. You're disbanding your levies, they're going back to working on their farms, etc. In like 3 years, when you raise them up again, they wouldn't have that same experience. So again, kind of a cool way for that to work. Baby Buffalo here then with another clarification question around manpower. Just so we understand, manpower is abstracted in the sense that it isn't assigned to a specific population, but losing manpower will decrease population proportionally from provinces that produce manpower. That was a sentence and a half, a lot of P's in there. Is that more or less correct? Because it would seem like a genius way to go around it, and Johan saying yes, that's exactly how it works. The next question, if you can't raise troops unless you're at war, how do you deal with rebels early game if you don't have a standing army? And then Johan's reply, which kind of answers my question from earlier, if you face rebels, you can raise your levies. So it does actually sound then like you can't just raise your army whenever you want. You can only raise your levies when you have a threat directly at you. So if you're at war or if you have rebels come up, you then can raise your levies, but you can't just raise them whenever you want. I imagine this is different to your regiments. You can have them going whenever you want. They're permanently on the screen, and you know, you don't have to worry about this then, which again, I think that kind of makes sense. I don't really have an issue with it, but I can see how some people, I guess, want to have them raised for some reason, but again, it doesn't really make sense, to be honest. The next question, if I lose control of a province that a building is in, do I lose the replenishment of that force from the province? Gameplay wise, if my whole nation is occupied, am I still able to pump out units as if it wasn't? And Johan's reply, if you still have the manpower pool, then some, but you can't reinforce anyway if you are not in friendly locations. So I think pretty much saying, like, if you have that manpower pool already built up, you will be able to replenish troops, even if the building that made that manpower is occupied, because you've kind of already built up that trained manpower in a way. But as he says here, if your entire realm has been occupied, you won't have anywhere where you can replenish anyway, because you can only do that in friendly locations. I guess you could kind of siege down one of their bits of land, and then you get a proportion of what you should get through that, as Johan does cover later on. But again, I think this all makes sense. If you lose the building that's making that manpower, you won't get any more from it, but you don't lose like the manpower you've already made as a way from that building. So if you have that from the earlier example, 3,000 manpower pool already made, you don't lose that when the building's kind of occupied. You just won't replenish it with that 25 extra each month that you are getting coming in. The next question is more around the diplomacy of war. If the levies of an AI country are wiped out, will this country be more willing to make peace, considering that it will take over a decade for their armies to recover? And the answer just being yes, of course they will. If they've lost their armies, and even the AI can see, it's going to take me 30 years to rebuild my army, I'm going to make peace, because otherwise he's just going to absolutely destroy my realm. The next question, will maintaining a standing army be expensive like it was historically? Johan's reply, again, kind of like a bit of a cryptic one in a way, it won't be cheap. So I guess that does mean it will be expensive. So a nice quick answer there from him. The next one, they also had a question about regulars or levies having a gold upkeep, or is the upkeep just the goods and manpower that they talked about in the dev diary? The answer is and gold. So they do cost the manpower, as we've already seen, the goods that they need to carry on being an effective fighting unit, but then they do also cost gold. As to how much that is, I don't think that's been covered anywhere yet. I'm sure it's like a percentage of the cost of making them or something. The next question, is there a drawback for doing genocide? I mean, what a question. By recruiting only from non-accepted culture provinces in your realm? And Johan's reply is saying you can't make manpower producing buildings where the dominant culture is not accepted. So I guess for this, they're saying, like, if you're playing as England and you took over France, couldn't you just make loads of French regiments and then just genocide them against another realm, like intentionally kill them all off to kill off a massive swathe of the French people in your newly acquired English lands? But Johan's reply spelling out that you can't make manpower from a province that the dominant culture is not accepted. So that wouldn't work until those French lands had enough English people in them that they would then be the prominent culture. So then it would raise regiments. I wonder then, is it always the dominant culture's troops that are raised? So is it always English troops then? Say you took over a French bit of land and it went up to like 51% English, 49% French after a while. The armies that are raised from there, are they 100% English because they're the dominant culture, or would they be a mix of the two? That would be interesting to know, because then I guess you would have to be really careful about how your fights played out again, so you didn't diminish your own kind of like power in certain provinces and things like that. But again, this was a cool question. I hadn't thought about it. It would be an interesting strategy if you could do it, but I'm glad they've thought about this and stopped you from doing it, because you could really exploit things. The next question, would an occupied fort/location count as a friendly location? And as I alluded to earlier, yes, but it is far less efficient at replenishing your troops and things like that. So it doesn't work exactly that you take somewhere and it immediately flips over and you get the full benefit of those lands. You are just the occupying force, so a certain percentage. I wonder if it's like the negative of their control. So if the other realm had like 60% control there, you take it over. I wonder if you get like 40% of the efficiency of it or something like that. The next question, again, further replies about the military and how it's going to work. Do you mean drilling unit experience or tradition, or are they tied together? They assume that the cost benefit of drilling is similar to how it works in EU4, where you've got to decide if you want that drilling action going on. Is it worth building up those bonuses rather than not fully funding your army at those times? And Johan's reply is that it impacts the unit experience. Tradition gain is partly based on the average unit experience. So, as they covered in the dev diary, is the average experience of all your troops. So you would really have to drill a lot of your troops to raise it quickly. The next question, this system sounds a lot like a hybrid between Victoria 2 and Imperator Rome, or maybe another game, question mark. And Johan replying that the last 3 games that he worked on was Victoria 2, EU4 and Imperator Rome. So he's bringing the experience from all these different games and making EU5 from the learnings he's made of those. I know some people don't agree with some of these features already explained by him and saying like, oh, this is from EU4, this system looks like it's from Imperator, this is all from that mod and things like that. Like, why isn't it more like EU4? And to be honest, like, I want him to do this. I want him to bring his learnings from these other games, these experiences that he's had, and make EU5 into like the next generation of Europa Universalis, not just a remake of EU4 with nicer graphics, really bringing in these different ways, like how trade's going to work, how the production systems are going to work. That is vastly different to the non-modded EU4. That is just an improvement overall, I think. Like, I'm sure some people when EU5 come out aren't going to like some of these systems. They want to go back to the more simplistic, I guess, EU4. I don't think anyone's ever called EU4 simplistic, but I think you know what I mean. Like, I'm sure some people won't like this version of it, but I want them to go that extra step and really try and change the formula a little bit and make it a much more interesting game overall. And it isn't just a relatively simplistic map painter, which, to be honest, EU4 really is. I'm sure there'll be some people in the comments now saying, Malforian doesn't know how to play EU4. Like, I don't, to be honest. I've not played it for like 3 years. I think I've got like 600 hours in it, but I've not played it for a long time. It is relatively simple to play outside of like the learning curve of actually learning how to play it. Once you do know how to play EU4, it is pretty simple to play. It is pretty much just a map painter. There are obviously things around that, like the colonization game. You can mess around with trade and things like that. But for what we've seen from these EU5 dev diaries, it does sound like that pretty much all these areas of the game are like rebuilt from the bottom up and really are much more interesting to play. And as we've covered with one of the earlier answers, there's going to be all these different ways you can play the game as well. It's not just the same way, which again, I know there are different ways to play EU4, but I would imagine the vast majority of you just play it as a map painter. I just get my realm as powerful as I can, and I just go ham on the map, and I take over and I win. That's probably how most of you play that game. And it does sound like you can do that in EU5, but there's going to be a lot more interesting stuff going on if that isn't what you're just primarily interested in. Good that he's bringing these learnings from these other games, especially Imperator. Imperator, very rough at launch. I'm sure he learned a lot from that. And then the 2.0 relaunch was such a win for that game. Well, it wasn't a full win. It still got shut down, but, you know, it was a big improvement to that game. And I'm sure he's brought the learnings from all of these over to make EU5 as good as it can be. The next question, though, when can we expect to learn more about how tech will work? I hope it's more detailed than it was in EU4. End of the summer, maybe, is the answer. So we are going to get a lot more dev diaries. Obviously, this game is like, what, at least a year away, maybe a year and a half away, potentially. We're going to get a lot of dev diaries. And at the moment, these Tinto Talks are pretty small. I know some of them have been a little bit longer, but once we get to the actual proper EU5 dev diaries, I imagine they're going to be huge and a lot of information in there. There's a lot of things we're going to cover at that point. And as he says, even now, end of summer maybe for how tech will work. Maybe that means they just haven't nailed it down fully, but there's also a lot they've got to talk about. And again, at the moment when it's kind of like abstracted out that it isn't EU5, but we all know that it is, until the game's officially announced, there is, I guess, a bit of a limitation as to what they want to talk about still. So that will also take effect as to when they're going to talk about some of these systems, I would think. And then on to the next question. As always, do make sure you've hit that like button if you're still here. This is going to be a pretty long video again, covering all of Johan's replies. So if you have enjoyed it, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if not already. But let's get on with it. How many dev diaries do you have scheduled? Kind of tying into the previous one. Many. I think obviously the previous one kind of hinted to that. We have got these every week, and he's already saying some of these features aren't even going to be talked about until the end of the summer. And then we're probably going to get dev diaries every week or most weeks up to the actual release of the game. So we're going to have many, many, many more dev diaries. Many more videos of me talking nonsense on YouTube, so do look forward to that. That's why you've subscribed. The next question, all about playing tall in the game. By that they mean 1, have a huge income, presumably from trade. 2, have a huge population from getting high technology, high standards of living, etc. And then the third one, fitting everything into a small land area, no larger than Brittany, for example, but with enough resources to field the biggest and most powerful army navy on the map. And the answer, yes. As I said, many different ways you can play this game, but you can do this. You can play small, just make a really small, dense nation. And although it's going to be hard to balance all of these things, I would think, it is going to be possible if you do play that well. You can get this figured out, especially as the poster said. If you do this via trade, you can see it kind of working that way. You bring a lot of trade in, that gives you an insane amount of revenue, and then that can be used to kind of prop up everything else. The next question is all about, are there going to be scripted historical characters like Elizabeth and Mary in England in EU4? So if you don't play EU4, there are some people that are obviously scripted into the game to appear at certain times. And that is pretty much what the question is. And yes, that will happen. The next question, is there any option to choose which rulers of the country will happen just the same as in history? Kind of leading on from the previous question. It would be great to start in 1337, but many good rulers have come and gone since then. I would love to play as each of these rulers. And Johan replying here, no. And again, going back to one of the earlier questions, bringing in his kind of experience from another game and saying that during EU3's development, they went with dynamic rulers as EU1 and 2 only had historical rulers. There was an outcry from part of the community then. Who would have thought the Paradox community getting mad about things? So they spent a large amount of development in the first expansion, Napoleon's Ambition, implementing historical rulers. And guess what, guys? No one played them. No one played them. This is a similar thing we see in Crusader Kings at the moment, where people are wanting other start dates in the game. Like, why can't I play in this year or this year at the start? And the Crusader Kings team have said, like, you asked for this in CK2 and no one played them. So it isn't worth our effort. Not no one played them, but such a small amount of the player base actually played them. It wasn't worth our time doing them for Crusader Kings 3. We might do them in the far future, but we're not going to do it now. And this is, again, what they're saying with EU5. Like, look, you want this thing? We did this before and no one played it, so we're not going to do it again. I think that's one of the cool things about Paradox. Like, they make a lot of mistakes, like any gaming company, but they do have such a wealth now of knowledge about how systems work, how players play those systems. Like, yeah, they still make systems we don't like, but generally there is a reason behind them. Like, we might not like how they work, but they can come to us and say, like, yeah, we're not doing that because of this reason. And you could look at this again. I think I covered this in one of the earlier dev diaries where Johan was talking about something, or it might have been in one of the Crusader Kings ones again. They all kind of blur together in my mind. You could look at this and say, like, yes, Johan, but EU3 was so long ago now. Like, we've learned from then. We would play differently now. But to Johan, and I kind of agree with him, it's probably not worth the kind of like risk and the development time to do this if their previous experiences that nobody did it. Maybe in the future we'll get some of this, but I kind of agree with him. Like, if they tried this and no one did it, like, why would you do it again? I'm sure some of you will disagree with that, but I kind of agree with Johan here. Like, especially as he's got an example here, we tried this with this expansion in EU3 and nobody played it. The next question, wait, what? There are naval levies now? How will these work? Like, can you raise ships from your estates? And the answer from Johan, again, a bit of a cryptic one, just yes. Yes, this is how it works. Okay. I'm guessing he means there are levies and you raise them from your estate. So I guess your estates, especially I guess your burgher estates, are going to have ships that you can raise to them and say, like, I'm taking these to go to war, thank you very much. I imagine that's what he means, but again, no information about this. I'm sure we'll get a naval-specific dev diary before too long, although it isn't going to be next week's. The next question, is there only one good that represents all weapons? At the moment, all they've shown in the screenshots is just weaponry. And Johan's saying there's currently weaponry and guns, but that these are just the two they have at the moment. They are still iterating over buildings and goods constantly, so we might get it split out into like cannons and muskets, ranged weapons, melee weapons, and things like that. But at the moment, it is just guns and weaponry. That might expand in the future. I guess if it makes sense, they'll test it. Does it just make busy work with no real advantage to kind of splitting it out? I can see why people do want it split out more, but like, does it actually make good gameplay for that to be the case? So again, Johan just saying it might change up to launch, but at the moment, it is just guns and weaponry. I think he does clarify later on that they are planning on splitting cannons from muskets, so you will have guns, weaponry, and cannons as basically the three. And that's how it's set up at the moment. I believe that's what he said. I forgot to take a screenshot of that one, but I'm pretty sure that is what he said. So I think we will see that change because cannons, you can have them on your ship, but then you can also have them as a, you know, a ground unit as well. So I think it would make sense if cannons are split out from the other two. That is the end of that question. And with that, that's the end of the questions that I picked out that Johan gave. Quite a long video again this week, so do make sure you've hit that like button if you've enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new here. I'm covering EU5 up to official announcement and launch. I cover the dev diaries each week, and then every Friday I do one of these videos going over Johan's replies, and we have a good discussion about it in the comments down below. And then I also cover the Crusader Kings dev diaries, discussion videos, all that kind of stuff for that game as well. So again, subscribe if that's your kind of thing, but we'll leave it there for today, and I'll see you in the next one.